Hi everyone, I'm Emma, and yes, my own father stood up at our annual family barbecue just to announce that only 2 kids made him proud, while looking directly at my sister Victoria and her billionaire boyfriend Alexander, completely ignoring me as if I wasn't even there. But what nobody knew was that Alexander had been quietly asking me financial questions all afternoon, and when he finally requested my investment advice in front of everyone, it didn't just shock my family. It completely rewrote who they thought I was and who actually deserved Dad's respect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation came 3 days before the barbecue. Not that I needed one, really. Every third Saturday in July for the past 15 years, Dad threw his annual summer gathering in our Riverside backyard, complete with his famous tri-tip and enough Mexican food to feed half the neighborhood. This year felt different though, heavier somehow, like the July heat was carrying more than just the scent of charcoal and cilantro. I sat in my modest one-bedroom apartment in Moreno Valley, staring at the group text that had started buzzing at 7 in the morning. Victoria had already sent 12 messages about her outfit choices, each photo more designer than the last, followed by casual mentions of bringing Alexander to meet the family properly this time. My stomach clenched every time I read his name, not because I was jealous, but because I knew exactly what this meant. Victoria had been dating Alexander Chen for 3 months now, parading him around like a trophy, and this barbecue would be her grand introduction of her billionaire tech entrepreneur boyfriend to the entire Rodriguez clan. I pulled my hair back into its usual low ponytail and reached for the faded UC Riverside Finance Department t-shirt hanging in my closet. The cotton was soft from years of washing, comfortable in a way that Victoria's designer pieces never seemed to be. As I got dressed, my phone buzzed again with another family group message, this time from Dad himself, asking everyone to be there by 2 sharp because I have something important to share with the family. My chest tightened reading those words because I knew, we all knew, that Dad's important announcements at these gatherings usually involved business decisions or family changes that would affect all of us. The drive from Moreno Valley to my parents' house in Riverside took 23 minutes, giving me just enough time to mentally prepare for what I suspected would be another afternoon of being overlooked. I parked on the street rather than in the driveway, partly because Victoria's white BMW was already taking up half the space, and partly because I'd learned long ago to keep my escape route clear during family gatherings. The sound of laughter and clinking bottles drifted over the wooden fence as I grabbed the store-bought potato salad from my passenger seat, knowing it would pale in comparison to whatever elaborate dish Victoria had probably commissioned from some upscale catering company. Walking through the side gate, I was immediately hit with the familiar chaos of a Rodriguez family gathering. String lights crisscrossed overhead even though it was still daylight, casting warm shadows across the patio where about 40 of our relatives and family friends had already gathered. The outdoor kitchen Dad had installed last year was in full operation, with Uncle Miguel manning the secondary grill while Dad stood at his prized custom barbecue setup, beer in one hand and metal spatula in the other, holding court with a circle of his business associates. Mom spotted me first and hurried over with that slightly frantic smile she always wore during hosting duties. "Mija, you made it. Put that in the kitchen and come say hello to everyone. Your prima Sofia is already here, and your tia Carmen has been asking about you." She gestured toward the covered patio where my cousin Sophia sat with a small group of our younger relatives, the only space that felt genuinely welcoming in the entire backyard. I made my way through the crowd, exchanging obligatory cheek kisses with aunts who commented on how thin I looked, and uncles who asked if I was still playing with numbers all day. These interactions had become routine over the years, polite but distant, like I was a familiar stranger who happened to share their DNA. The contrast became even sharper when I spotted Victoria holding court near the pool, her laugh carrying across the water as she gestured animatedly to a captivated audience of female cousins and family friends. She looked stunning, of course, in a flowing white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her dark hair styled in perfect beach waves that somehow stayed intact despite the July humidity. But it was the man standing beside her that made everyone's attention gravitate toward their corner of the patio. Alexander Chen was exactly what you'd expect a billionaire tech entrepreneur to look like if billionaire tech entrepreneurs shopped at the same stores as regular people. Jeans, white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, expensive watch that wasn't flashy, and an easy smile that suggested he was genuinely enjoying himself rather than enduring a family obligation. I found refuge at Sophia's table, settling into the familiar comfort of conversation with the few family members who actually seemed interested in my life beyond surface pleasantries. Sophia worked as a nurse at Riverside Community Hospital and always had stories that made my investment analysis work seem tame by comparison. "So Emma, still making money disappear and reappear like magic?" she teased, referencing my attempts to explain cryptocurrency to her last Christmas. "Something like that," I replied, grateful that at least one person in the family acknowledged what I did for work, even if she didn't entirely understand it. "How's the emergency room treating you?" "Same chaos, different day." "But speaking of chaos," Sophia nodded toward Victoria's growing audience, "looks like your sister's putting on quite the show today. Think this Alexander guy is serious, or is this just another one of her 3-month relationships?" I followed her gaze and watched Victoria link her arm through Alexander's, positioning them perfectly for the group of aunts who were clearly taking mental notes to share with the rest of the family later. Hard to say, she's definitely laying it on thick today, even for her standards. What struck me as odd, though, was how Alexander's attention kept drifting away from Victoria's animated storytelling. Every few minutes, his eyes would scan the crowd like he was looking for something or someone specific. When his gaze briefly met mine across the patio, I quickly looked away, focusing on Sophia's description of her latest nursing school adventures. The afternoon progressed with its usual rhythm of food, family gossip, and the gradually increasing volume that always accompanied any Rodriguez gathering. Dad made his rounds, checking on everyone's plates and drinks, playing the perfect host while somehow managing to keep one eye on his prized tri-tip. I helped Mom carry platters from the kitchen, refilled drinks for the older relatives, and generally tried to stay useful without drawing too much attention to myself. It was during one of these kitchen runs that Alexander appeared beside me at the outdoor bar setup, reaching for a beer from the ice-filled tub. "Emma, right?" he said, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent that suggested English wasn't his first language, though his pronunciation was flawless. "Victoria's mentioned you're in finance. I nearly dropped the pitcher of agua fresca I was carrying." In 3 months of dating my sister, this was the first time Alexander had directly acknowledged my existence, let alone initiated a conversation. "Yes, I work for a small investment firm downtown. Nothing too exciting." I automatically downplayed my work, a habit I'd developed over years of family gatherings, where business talk usually excluded anyone under 30 or anyone without a business degree from a prestigious university. Investment analysis can be incredibly exciting, actually. What sectors do you focus on? His question caught me off guard, not just because he was asking, but because it was a genuinely informed question rather than polite small talk. Mostly emerging markets and alternative investments. Some cryptocurrency analysis, though that's more of a side interest. I found myself answering honestly, rather than giving my usual vague response about helping people with their money. Alexander's eyebrows raised slightly, and for the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely interested in a conversation. "Cryptocurrency? That's fascinating. I've been watching the DeFi space develop, but I'd love to hear a ground-level perspective from someone who's actually analyzing the market trends." Before I could respond, Victoria appeared at Alexander's side like she had some kind of proximity sensor. "Baby, you're not boring my little sister with work talk, are you?" She laughed in that musical way she'd perfected for public consumption, threading her arm through his while simultaneously dismissing both me and the conversation we'd been having. Actually, Emma was just explaining her work in cryptocurrency analysis. It sounds like she has some really interesting insights into emerging markets. Alexander's tone remained friendly, but I caught the subtle way he didn't immediately allow Victoria to redirect his attention. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, Emma's always been our little numbers girl. She loves all that boring financial stuff that nobody else understands." The words were delivered with affection, but the underlying message was clear. Emma's work was complicated, boring, and ultimately irrelevant to anyone who mattered. "I'd hardly call cryptocurrency analysis boring," Alexander replied mildly, and I felt a small surge of gratitude that someone had actually defended my work in front of my family, even if that someone was my sister's boyfriend. The intersection of technology and finance is reshaping entire economic systems. It's probably one of the most exciting fields in business right now. Victoria's laugh became slightly forced. "Well, you two can discuss all the technical stuff later. Right now, I want to introduce you to my Uncle Miguel. He has some amazing stories about Dad's early business days." She successfully guided Alexander away from our conversation, but not before he glanced back at me with what looked like genuine regret at the interruption. I stood by the drink station for a moment longer than necessary, processing what had just happened. In my entire adult life, no one at a family gathering had ever described my work as exciting or important. Victoria's boyfriends usually either ignored me completely or made polite but brief conversation before moving on to more interesting relatives. But Alexander had asked follow-up questions, used industry terminology correctly, and actually defended the relevance of my work when Victoria tried to dismiss it. The rest of the afternoon took on a strange quality, like watching a movie where you kept noticing details in the background that didn't quite fit the main plot. While Victoria continued her performance as the perfect girlfriend introducing her successful boyfriend to the family, I found myself catching fragments of Alexander's conversations with various relatives. He asked thoughtful questions about Uncle Miguel's construction business, showed genuine interest in Tia Carmen's stories about teaching elementary school, and somehow managed to remember details about cousins he'd only met once before. But what struck me most was how often his attention seemed to drift during Victoria's more elaborate stories about their relationship. When she launched into her carefully crafted narrative about their first date at some exclusive Beverly Hills restaurant, Alexander's eyes wandered to the business conversation happening near Dad's grill. When she detailed their recent weekend in Napa Valley, complete with Instagram-worthy descriptions of the vineyard they'd visited, he seemed more interested in Sophia's explanation of hospital administration challenges. The sun was starting to lower in the sky when Dad finally called for everyone's attention. The crowd gradually gathered in the main patio area, cold drinks in hand, settling into the lawn chairs and benches that had been arranged in a loose semicircle around Dad's preferred speaking spot near the outdoor kitchen. This was the moment we'd all been anticipating, the reason Dad had specified that everyone needed to be there by 2 sharp. Victoria positioned herself and Alexander prominently in the front row, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that looked casual, but was clearly calculated for maximum visibility. I found a spot toward the back with Sophia, close enough to hear everything but far enough away to avoid being part of whatever announcement was coming. Dad waited until the conversations died down and all eyes were focused on him before he began speaking. He looked exactly like what he was, a successful small business owner who'd built something solid through decades of hard work and practical decisions. His graying hair was neatly combed, his polo shirt was crisp despite the afternoon heat, and his voice carried the authority of someone who was used to making important decisions and having people listen. "Thank you all for being here today. As most of you know, I've been thinking a lot lately about the future of Rodriguez Plumbing Supply and what happens when your old man finally decides to slow down a little." A ripple of knowing laughter passed through the crowd. Dad had been threatening to retire for 3 years now, but his definition of slowing down usually meant working 50 hours a week instead of 60. I've been in business for 28 years now, and in that time I've learned that success isn't just about working hard, though that's certainly part of it. It's about making smart decisions, understanding your market, and knowing how to adapt when things change. Most importantly, it's about having people around you who share your values and can help take the business to the next level. Victoria straightened in her chair, and I could see her hand tighten slightly on Alexander's arm. This was the moment she'd been preparing for, the announcement that would validate her position as Dad's chosen successor and cement her status as the family's success story. Over the years, I've watched my daughters grow into capable, intelligent women, each with their own strengths and talents. And I'm proud to say that both of them have exceeded my expectations in different ways. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad's voice carried across the patio, and I felt every relative turn slightly to look at Victoria and then search the crowd to locate me in the back. Victoria has always been my social butterfly, my networker, the one who can walk into any room and make connections. She's got a good head for marketing, and she understands how to present our family in the best possible light. And now she's brought home someone who clearly shares our values and appreciates what we've built here. Dad nodded toward Alexander, who smiled politely but looked slightly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. The pause that followed felt loaded with anticipation. Victoria's smile was radiant, confident, ready to accept whatever role Dad was about to offer her in the business succession plan. But I've also been watching Emma, my quiet one, my numbers girl, as Victoria likes to call her. And what I've noticed is that Emma doesn't just understand money, she understands how to make it work. She's been quietly building something impressive, and I think it's time the rest of the family knew about it. My stomach dropped. I had no idea what Dad was referring to, what he thought he knew about my work or my financial situation. I'd been incredibly careful to keep my investment successes private, partly because I knew the family would either not understand or would suddenly want to become very interested in my previously dismissed career. 2 kids made me proud, Dad continued, his voice carrying clearly across the now completely silent patio. Victoria for bringing home a young man who obviously cares about family and understands the value of hard work, and Emma for proving that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should be paying attention to. The applause that followed was polite but confused. I could see relatives looking around, trying to understand what exactly Dad was announcing, and what it meant for the family business succession plan that everyone had assumed was a foregone conclusion in Victoria's favor. But Dad wasn't finished. Alexander, I understand you're in the tech business, something to do with financial technology? Alexander nodded, looking uncertain about where this conversation was heading. Well, I'd love to get your perspective on something. I've been thinking about modernizing some of our business operations, maybe exploring some investment opportunities to diversify our income streams. Emma's been telling me about some interesting market trends, and I'd value your opinion on whether we should be looking at some of these newer financial instruments. The patio fell completely silent. Every eye turned toward Alexander, waiting for his response to Dad's request for business advice. But Alexander, instead of immediately answering Dad's question, turned in his chair to look directly at me. Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, I think the person you should be asking is Emma. From our conversation earlier, it sounds like she has a much better understanding of emerging markets and alternative investments than I do. I'd be very interested to hear her analysis of current opportunities in the cryptocurrency and DeFi spaces. The silence that followed was different from the polite attention Dad's announcement had received. This was the silence of 40 people trying to process something that didn't fit their understanding of family dynamics, business hierarchy, or the natural order of things. Victoria's smile had frozen in place, her hand still resting on Alexander's arm but now rigid rather than casually affectionate. Emma? Dad's voice carried across the patio, and suddenly every relative, family friend, and business associate was looking at me expectantly. Would you mind sharing some of your insights? Alexander seems to think you might have some valuable perspective to offer. I felt Sophia nudge my elbow gently, a subtle encouragement to stand up and accept the unexpected invitation to speak. My heart was racing, but not from nervousness. For the first time in my adult life, someone at a family gathering was asking for my professional opinion, treating my work as valuable and worth hearing about, and that someone was a billionaire tech entrepreneur who had just publicly endorsed my expertise in front of my entire family. As I stood up and made my way toward the front of the gathering, I caught a glimpse of Victoria's expression. The confident smile had completely disappeared, replaced by something between confusion and alarm. She was staring at Alexander like he had just betrayed some fundamental agreement between them, while he looked genuinely interested in what I was about to say. Well, I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected it to be. If you're really interested in diversification strategies and emerging market opportunities, there are definitely some trends worth discussing. Standing in front of 40 family members and friends, I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety that I'd experienced at every presentation during my finance degree program, but this time was different. This wasn't a classroom full of strangers grading my performance on theoretical models. These were the people who had dismissed my career choice as playing with numbers for the past 6 years, and now they were waiting to hear what I actually knew about the financial world they'd always assumed was beyond my understanding. Alexander had positioned himself slightly forward in his chair, his attention completely focused on me in a way that made Victoria's carefully maintained smile look increasingly strained. Dad stood near his grill with his arms crossed, not in a defensive posture but in the way he always stood when he was genuinely interested in hearing someone's opinion. The rest of the family had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, some sitting on the edge of their seats with curiosity, others looking skeptical about why anyone would ask the quiet Rodriguez daughter for business advice. The traditional investment landscape has shifted dramatically over the past 5 years. I began, my voice steadying as I fell into the familiar rhythm of market analysis. When most people think about diversification, they're still thinking in terms of stocks, bonds, maybe real estate. But there are emerging asset classes that offer both higher returns and better hedging against inflation, particularly in the technology and digital asset sectors. I could see Uncle Miguel nodding thoughtfully. He'd been expanding his construction business lately and had mentioned concerns about rising material costs eating into his profit margins. The key is understanding that we're not just talking about cryptocurrency as speculation, which is how most media coverage presents it. We're talking about blockchain technology as infrastructure, the same way we might have talked about investing in internet companies in the early 1990s. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating genuine interest rather than polite attention. What specific sectors within blockchain do you think offer the most stability for traditional business expansion? The question revealed that he wasn't just being polite. He was asking the kind of follow-up question that only someone with real knowledge of the space would think to ask. Supply chain management and business verification systems, I replied without hesitation. For a business like Dad's, blockchain-based inventory tracking could reduce overhead costs by 15 to 20%, while improving customer confidence in product authenticity and delivery timing. Dad's eyebrows raised. He'd been complaining for months about inventory management issues and the rising costs of tracking shipments across multiple supplier relationships. You're saying this computer technology could help with our day-to-day operations, not just investment returns? Exactly. The investment opportunity isn't separate from practical business applications. Companies that adopt blockchain infrastructure early are seeing both operational improvements and significant increases in valuation. Tesla didn't just buy Bitcoin as a speculation play. They integrated cryptocurrency payments because they understood that early adoption of new financial technologies creates competitive advantages. Victoria shifted in her chair, her smile becoming more forced as the conversation continued without her input. That all sounds very complicated, she interjected, her tone suggesting that complexity was inherently problematic. Wouldn't it be simpler to stick with traditional investment strategies that have proven track records? The question was clearly intended to undermine the value of what I was discussing, but it actually gave me an opening to address what I knew was everyone's primary concern about new financial technologies. Traditional strategies absolutely have their place, but they're not providing the returns needed to keep pace with current inflation rates. A conservative portfolio of bonds and blue-chip stocks might have protected wealth 20 years ago, but today it's actually losing purchasing power, even when it shows positive returns. I walked toward the table where Sophia was sitting, feeling more confident as I moved into teaching mode. Let me give you a concrete example. If Uncle Miguel invests $10,000 in a traditional savings account earning 2% annually, he'll have about $10,600 after 3 years. But if inflation runs at 4% during that same period, his purchasing power has actually decreased. He can buy less with that $10,600 than he could with the original $10,000. Uncle Miguel nodded slowly. So the safe choice isn't actually safe. Right. But if he puts that same $10,000 into a diversified cryptocurrency portfolio, focused on established protocols with real-world applications, historical data suggests he could see returns between 15 and 30% annually, well above inflation. Obviously, there's more risk, but the bigger risk might be staying in traditional investments that guarantee slow losses. Alexander was watching this exchange with what looked like growing respect for my understanding of both technical concepts and practical communication. Emma, what would you say to someone who's concerned about the volatility in cryptocurrency markets? How do you balance potential returns against downside risk? This was exactly the kind of question that separated serious investors from people who'd only heard cryptocurrency discussed in sensationalized news stories. Dollar cost averaging and portfolio weighting, I replied immediately. You never put money into high volatility investments that you can't afford to lose completely. But you also can't afford to ignore high growth sectors entirely. A properly balanced approach might be 5 to 10% of total investment capital in cryptocurrency, purchased gradually over 12 to 18 months to smooth out market fluctuations. Dad had been listening intently, and now he spoke up with the practical focus that had made his business successful. What about timing? If someone wanted to start exploring these investment options, is this a good time to get in, or should they wait for prices to come down? Time in the market beats timing the market, I said, quoting one of the fundamental principles I'd learned early in my finance education. Every month people wait for cryptocurrency prices to come down is a month they miss potential gains. Bitcoin was $8,000 2 years ago. People said it was too expensive then. Today it's trading above $30,000, and people are still saying it's too expensive. Sophia raised her hand slightly, grinning at the formal gesture. Okay, but what about regular people who don't have thousands of dollars to invest? Can someone with a few $100s really benefit from these strategies? Absolutely. That's one of the advantages of cryptocurrency over traditional investing. You can buy fractional shares of Bitcoin or Ethereum for as little as $25. Many traditional brokerages require minimum investments that put them out of reach for people just starting to build wealth. Cryptocurrency democratizes access to high-growth investment opportunities. Victoria had been growing more visibly uncomfortable as the conversation progressed, and now she tried again to redirect attention. This is all very educational, but aren't we getting a bit carried away with theoretical discussions? Emma's hobby is interesting, but we're talking about real family money here. The dismissal stung, but it also revealed something important about how Victoria viewed both my work and the conversation happening around her. To her, this was a theoretical discussion about my hobby rather than a serious consultation about investment strategies. But Alexander's response made it clear that he saw things very differently. Actually, Victoria, Emma's analysis aligns closely with current institutional investment trends. Major corporations and hedge funds are allocating significant portions of their portfolios to cryptocurrency and blockchain-related assets. This isn't hobby-level information. This is the kind of strategic thinking that drives major financial decisions. The validation from someone of Alexander's stature sent a ripple of reconsideration through the family gathering. Suddenly, relatives who had been listening politely were leaning forward with genuine interest. Tia Carmen, who managed the household finances for her family, raised her hand tentatively. Emma, Misha, this all sounds promising, but how does someone like me, who barely understands how online banking works, get started with something so technical? This was the question I'd been hoping someone would ask, because it allowed me to demonstrate that sophisticated investment strategies didn't require technical expertise. You don't need to understand the underlying technology any more than you need to understand how credit cards work to use them safely. There are user-friendly platforms that make cryptocurrency investing as simple as using any other financial app. I pulled out my phone and opened one of the investment apps I used regularly. This is Coinbase, which is probably the most beginner-friendly platform. It's regulated by the same financial authorities that oversee traditional banks, and it provides educational resources that explain every investment option in simple terms. You can set up automatic purchases, just like a savings plan, that buys small amounts of cryptocurrency on a regular schedule. Dad moved closer to see the phone screen, his curiosity overcoming any skepticism he might have had about digital financial tools. And this is legitimate? This isn't some internet scheme? Coinbase is a publicly traded company worth over $30 billion. It's used by millions of people and institutions worldwide. PayPal, Square, and Tesla all use similar platforms for their cryptocurrency operations. The technology has moved far beyond the early experimental phase. Alexander nodded in agreement. My company actually uses blockchain technology for our payment processing systems. The infrastructure Emma's describing is already integrated into mainstream financial services. Most people are using it without realizing it. The conversation had taken on a momentum of its own, with different family members asking increasingly specific questions about investment strategies, platform security, and practical implementation. I found myself moving around the patio, showing different people how various apps worked, explaining concepts like market capitalization and portfolio diversification, and helping them understand how these new financial tools could fit into their existing financial planning. Victoria had grown increasingly silent as the afternoon progressed, her earlier confidence replaced by what looked like confusion about how the family dynamic had shifted so dramatically. She was used to being the center of attention at these gatherings, the one with interesting stories and impressive connections. But now the entire family was focused on me, asking for my advice and treating my knowledge as valuable and relevant to their own lives. The shift became even more pronounced when Dad asked the question that everyone had probably been thinking but hadn't wanted to voice directly. "Emma, you clearly know a lot about this stuff, but I have to ask, have you actually made money with these investments? Or is this all theoretical knowledge?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel Victoria's attention sharpen, probably hoping that I would have to admit that my expertise was purely academic. But the truth was that my investment success had exceeded even my own expectations, and I had the documentation to prove it. I started investing in cryptocurrency during my senior year of college with money I made from tutoring other students in financial analysis, I said carefully. My initial investment was about $1,500, which felt like a fortune at the time. Today, that portfolio is worth just over $300,000. The silence that followed was complete. Even the background noise of neighborhood activities seemed to fade as everyone processed what I'd just revealed. $300,000 represented more money than most of my family members had in their retirement accounts, and I'd built it starting with pocket change in less than 6 years. Uncle Miguel was the first to speak, his voice carrying a note of awe. $300,000? Emma, that's more than I made in profit last year from the construction business. And she did it while working full-time at the investment firm, Sophia added, clearly proud of her cousin's success but also helping the family understand that this wasn't the result of taking huge risks with inheritance money or family resources. Alexander was looking at me with something approaching admiration. That's an exceptional return rate. Emma, you've clearly developed significant expertise in alternative asset management. Have you considered expanding your investment advisory work? The question revealed that he understood the implications of what I'd accomplished better than my own family did. Building a $300,000 portfolio from a $1,500 starting point required not just luck, but consistent analytical skill and disciplined decision-making over an extended period. I do some consulting work for friends and colleagues, I replied, but I've kept it small scale. Most of my focus has been on building my own financial foundation before taking responsibility for other people's money. Dad was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between surprise and respect. Emma, why didn't you ever tell us about this? If you've been this successful with investments, why keep it secret? The question was fair, but the answer was complicated by years of family dynamics that had taught me to downplay my achievements, to avoid seeming boastful or threatening to Victoria's position as the family's success story. I guess I didn't think anyone would be interested in hearing about it. Investment talk isn't usually welcome at family gatherings. Victoria finally found her voice, but her tone carried an edge that hadn't been there earlier in the day. It's not that we wouldn't be interested, Emma. It's just that you never mentioned making so much money. That seems like something you might have shared with your family. The implication was clear. I had been deceptive or secretive about my financial success, which somehow made it less legitimate or trustworthy. But Alexander's response cut through that interpretation immediately. Actually, keeping investment success private is a sign of financial maturity, he said firmly. People who understand wealth building know that discussing specific amounts can create unrealistic expectations and unwanted pressure from others. Emma's discretion suggests she understands money management on a deeper level than just generating returns. The endorsement from Alexander carried weight that my own explanations couldn't match. When a billionaire tech entrepreneur praised someone's financial judgment, it meant something different than family members complimenting each other's achievements. Victoria seemed to recognize this, because her smile had become noticeably forced. "Well, this has all been very educational," she said, standing up and smoothing her dress in a gesture that suggested the conversation had gone on long enough. "Alexander, should we start thinking about heading out? We have dinner reservations, and traffic back to Newport Beach can be unpredictable on weekend evenings." But Alexander remained seated, showing no indication that he was ready to leave. "Actually, I was hoping to continue this conversation a bit longer. Emma, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on decentralized finance protocols, and whether you think they represent sustainable investment opportunities or just speculative bubbles." The question was sophisticated enough that most of the family probably didn't understand what he was asking, but it demonstrated that he wanted to engage with me on a professional level rather than just being polite about my hobby. Victoria's suggestion that they leave had been effectively dismissed in favor of continuing a technical discussion about financial markets. "DeFi is probably the most interesting development in finance since the creation of stock markets," I replied, settling back into my chair to indicate that I was happy to continue the conversation. The ability to earn yield on cryptocurrency holdings through lending protocols and liquidity mining represents a fundamental shift in how financial services operate. As I launched into an explanation of smart contracts and automated market makers, I could see Victoria standing beside Alexander's chair, clearly frustrated that her attempt to end the gathering had been ignored. For the first time in my memory at a family event, someone was more interested in continuing a conversation with me than in accommodating Victoria's preferences. Dad had pulled up a chair closer to where Alexander and I were talking, his business instincts recognizing that this was the kind of discussion that could provide valuable insights for his own financial planning. Other family members had also repositioned themselves to better hear the conversation, treating it like an informal seminar rather than casual party talk. "The traditional financial system requires intermediaries for almost every transaction," I continued, warming to the subject as I saw genuine interest in the faces around me. "Banks, brokers, clearinghouses, insurance companies. Each intermediary takes a fee and adds processing time. Decentralized finance eliminates most of these intermediaries, which means higher returns for investors and lower costs for borrowers." Alexander nodded enthusiastically. "And the transparency aspect is revolutionary. Every transaction is recorded on the blockchain, so there's no possibility of hidden fees or manipulated records. Traditional financial institutions have built their profit models around information asymmetry and complexity that customers can't easily understand." The conversation had evolved beyond simple investment advice into a broader discussion about how technological innovation was reshaping entire industries. I found myself explaining concepts like yield farming and liquidity pools to an audience that was genuinely engaged and asking thoughtful follow-up questions. Victoria had finally sat back down, but her body language suggested impatience rather than interest. She kept checking her phone and making small comments about time and traffic that were clearly intended to remind Alexander of their dinner plans. But he seemed completely absorbed in the financial discussion, asking increasingly detailed questions about my investment strategies and analytical methods. "Emma, have you considered writing about these trends or speaking at industry conferences?" Alexander asked. "Your ability to explain complex financial concepts in accessible terms is impressive. There's definitely a market for that kind of educational content." The suggestion that I could be a public expert on financial topics was so far outside my usual family role that it took me a moment to process. I'd spent years being treated as the quiet one who happened to work with numbers, and now someone was suggesting that my knowledge was valuable enough to share with professional audiences. "I've thought about it," I admitted, "but I wasn't sure there would be interest in hearing from someone without an MBA from a prestigious university or experience at a major investment bank. Some of the most insightful financial analysis I've encountered has come from people who built their expertise through practical experience rather than traditional credentials," Alexander replied. "Academic knowledge is valuable, but there's no substitute for actually managing investments through multiple market cycles." Dad had been listening to this exchange with growing attention, and now he spoke up with the kind of practical question that always characterized his approach to business decisions. Emma, if you were advising someone like me, someone with a traditional business who's looking to modernize and maybe diversify income streams, what would your first recommendations be? The question represented a level of respect for my professional judgment that I'd never experienced from my family before. Dad was asking me to provide the same kind of strategic advice that he might seek from his accountant or business attorney, treating my expertise as a legitimate resource for important financial decisions. First, I'd want to understand your current financial position and risk tolerance, I replied, falling into the consultative approach I used with my professional clients. But in general terms, I'd recommend a three-pronged strategy: operational efficiency improvements, portfolio diversification, and strategic positioning for technological change. I spent the next 20 minutes walking Dad through specific recommendations for his business, from inventory management systems that could reduce overhead costs to investment strategies that would provide additional income streams beyond the core plumbing supply operations. Alexander contributed insights about technological implementation and industry trends, turning the conversation into a collaborative consultation session. The rest of the family listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for major announcements or serious family discussions. They were witnessing something that had never happened before at a Rodriguez family gathering: their quiet, overlooked daughter being treated as a subject matter expert whose advice was actively sought by successful business people. Victoria's frustration had become increasingly evident as the afternoon progressed without any attention directed toward her or acknowledgement of her role in bringing Alexander to the family gathering. She had expected this barbecue to be her moment of triumph, the day she introduced her impressive boyfriend and solidified her position as the family's most successful daughter. Instead, she was watching Alexander treat me as a valued colleague, while largely ignoring her attempts to redirect the conversation or remind him of their other commitments. When the sun finally began to set and the gathering started its natural wind-down, Alexander stood up and walked over to where I was helping Mom collect empty plates and glasses. "Emma, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to continue our conversation sometime when we have more privacy. Would you be interested in discussing some potential business opportunities? I think your analytical skills could be valuable for some projects I'm considering." The invitation was delivered in a professional tone that suggested genuine business interest rather than personal or social motivations. But the effect on the family gathering was immediate and unmistakable. Alexander Chen, the billionaire tech entrepreneur that Victoria had been proudly presenting as her boyfriend, was asking me for private business meetings to discuss professional opportunities. Victoria's face had gone completely pale, and for the first time all day she seemed at a loss for words. Dad looked impressed and perhaps slightly bewildered by this turn of events. The rest of the family was watching the exchange, with expressions ranging from surprise to admiration to confusion about what this meant for family dynamics going forward. "I'd be very interested in that conversation," I replied, trying to keep my tone as professional as Alexander's, despite the surreal nature of the situation. "When would be convenient for you? I'll have my assistant send you some calendar options early next week. Thank you for an incredibly enlightening afternoon." Alexander shook my hand formally, the gesture emphasizing the professional nature of his interest in maintaining contact. As I watched Victoria walk toward the parking area with Alexander, I could see her trying to regain control of the narrative, speaking in animated tones that suggested she was either explaining or complaining about something. But Alexander's responses appeared brief and distracted, like someone whose attention was still focused on the conversation he'd just left, rather than the person he was walking beside. Sophia appeared at my elbow as we watched them leave. "Well, that was unexpected," she said with characteristic understatement. I don't think Victoria was planning for her boyfriend to spend the entire afternoon asking her little sister for investment advice. I was still processing everything that had happened, from the initial surprise of Alexander's interest in my work, to the gradual realization that I'd just spent several hours being treated as a financial expert by my own family for the first time in my adult life. I'm not sure any of us were planning for how today turned out. Dad joined us by the kitchen window, still holding the beer he'd been nursing throughout the afternoon discussions. "Emma, I have to ask, when you were talking about all those investment strategies and business improvements, were you just sharing general knowledge, or do you actually have specific recommendations for our family business?" The question indicated that Dad was taking the afternoon's conversation seriously as potential business planning, rather than just interesting theoretical discussion. He was asking whether I could provide the same kind of strategic analysis for Rodriguez plumbing supply that I provided for my professional clients. I'd need to review your current financial statements and understand your business goals better, I replied carefully. But yes, I think there are definitely opportunities for operational improvements and investment diversification that could benefit the business. Dad nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that he was considering possibilities that hadn't occurred to him before today. Would you be willing to put together some kind of formal analysis? I mean, I'd pay you for professional consultation work, the same way I pay the accountant or the business attorney. The offer represented a complete reversal of my position within the family business hierarchy. For years, I'd been excluded from any meaningful involvement in Dad's business decisions, treated as too young or inexperienced to contribute valuable insights. Now he was asking me to provide the same kind of professional services that he purchased from other experts. I'd be honored to work on something like that, I said, meaning it completely. The opportunity to contribute to the family business in a meaningful way was something I'd wanted for years but had never thought to request directly. As the last of the family members said their goodbyes and the backyard gradually returned to its normal, quiet state, I helped Mom and Dad clean up the remnants of the barbecue while processing everything that had changed over the course of a single afternoon. When we'd all gathered earlier that day, I had been the overlooked daughter whose work was dismissed as playing with numbers. Now I was fielding requests for business consultation and investment advice from both a billionaire entrepreneur and my own father. The transformation felt surreal, like I'd somehow stepped into a different version of my life, where my expertise was recognized and valued instead of dismissed and ignored. But as I replayed the afternoon's conversations, I realized that the only thing that had really changed was other people's understanding of what I'd already accomplished. My knowledge and success hadn't appeared overnight. They'd finally been seen and acknowledged by people who mattered. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that sometimes follows life-changing events, when ordinary routines feel different because everything underneath them has shifted. I sat at my small kitchen table with coffee and my laptop, watching emails populate my inbox while replaying Saturday's barbecue in my mind. The most surreal part wasn't that Alexander had asked for private business meetings, though that was still hard to believe. It was the memory of Dad asking me for professional consultation on the family business, speaking to me with the same respect he showed his accountant or attorney. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia asking if I was okay after yesterday's performance, followed immediately by another message asking if I'd heard from Victoria. I hadn't, which was unusual since my sister typically sent post-event family gossip within hours of any gathering. The silence felt loaded with meaning, like the calm before an inevitable storm. Around 10:30, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize, with the subject line, Meeting Request, Alexander Chen. My heart rate accelerated as I opened it, half expecting it to be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Instead, I found a professionally formatted message from Alexander's executive assistant, offering 3 possible meeting times for the following week and asking for my preferred location. The tone was formal and businesslike, treating me like any other professional contact rather than his girlfriend's little sister who happened to know something about investments. I was still staring at the email when my phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual since he typically only called during business emergencies or family crises. Emma, I hope I'm not interrupting your work, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. Are you serious about doing that business analysis we discussed? His voice carried the focused energy he used during important business calls, very different from the casual tone of family conversations. Absolutely serious, I replied. When would you like to start reviewing the financial information? How about this afternoon? I could bring some documents by your office. Or, if you prefer, we could meet at the business after normal hours when things are quieter. The offer to meet at Rodriguez Plumbing Supply felt significant, like an acknowledgement that this would be a legitimate business consultation rather than a favor between family members. Your office would be perfect. I'll finish my regular work early and meet you there around 5 if that works for you. As I spoke, I realized that I was committing to something that would fundamentally change my relationship with both Dad and the family business. This wouldn't be a one-time consultation. It would establish me as a trusted advisor with ongoing involvement in strategic decisions. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the morning handling my regular responsibilities at the investment firm, while my mind kept drifting to the larger implications of what was happening. Within the span of a single weekend, I'd gone from being the overlooked daughter to having two significant professional opportunities that could reshape my career and family relationships. But underneath the excitement was a growing awareness that Victoria wouldn't accept this shift in family dynamics without a fight. That awareness proved prophetic when my phone rang again around 2 o'clock. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and her voice, when I answered, carried a tension I'd rarely heard from her before. "Emma, we need to talk. Are you free for coffee this afternoon?" The request was phrased politely, but something in her tone suggested it wasn't really a request. "I'm meeting Dad at his office at 5, but I could meet you before that. What's this about?" "Just some family stuff we should discuss privately. How about that coffee place on University Avenue around 3:30? Victoria's voice was carefully controlled, but I could detect an undercurrent of something that might have been anger or frustration. The coffee shop Victoria had chosen was one of those aggressively trendy places with exposed brick walls and baristas who took themselves very seriously. I arrived first and claimed a small table near the window, ordering a basic latte while watching the afternoon foot traffic of college students and young professionals. Victoria swept in 15 minutes later wearing designer sunglasses and a business casual outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She removed her sunglasses with theatrical precision before sitting down, her expression serious in a way that reminded me of Mom preparing to deliver bad news about report cards or household rules. "Emma, I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday at the barbecue. I think there might have been some misunderstandings that we should clear up." The phrasing was diplomatic, but the implication was that I had somehow misinterpreted the situation or overstepped boundaries that should have been obvious. "What kind of misunderstandings?" I asked, genuinely curious about how Victoria had processed the afternoon's events. "Well, for one thing, I think Alexander was just being polite when he asked you about investments. He's very good at making people feel important and engaged, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's planning to actually do business with them." Victoria's tone was patient, like she was explaining something I should have understood without help. I sipped my latte and considered how to respond. The conversation felt like it was heading toward familiar territory, where Victoria would carefully explain why my perceptions were wrong, and her interpretation was more realistic. He seemed pretty specific in his questions about DeFi protocols and blockchain infrastructure. That's not really polite small talk. Alexander talks about work constantly. It's actually one of his less attractive qualities, to be honest. He can turn any conversation into a business discussion, even when people are just trying to have a nice family gathering. Victoria's smile was indulgent, like she was sharing an amusing quirk about her boyfriend's personality. "So you think his request for private business meetings was just him being conversational?" I kept my tone neutral, but I was genuinely curious about whether Victoria actually believed what she was saying or whether this was strategic reframing. Victoria's smile became slightly strained. "Emma, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but Alexander deals with real investment professionals every day. People with Harvard MBAs who manage hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm sure your cryptocurrency hobby is interesting, but it's not really in the same league as the kind of business he's used to handling." The dismissal was delivered gently, but it was still a dismissal. Victoria was explaining that I had misunderstood the significance of Alexander's interest, that my knowledge and success weren't as impressive as I thought, and that I should recalibrate my expectations accordingly. It was a familiar dynamic, but this time it felt different because I had external validation for my expertise. "Victoria, I appreciate your concern, but I think I'm capable of understanding professional interest when I encounter it." Alexander asked specific technical questions that only someone with real knowledge of cryptocurrency markets would ask. He wasn't just being polite. My voice was calm, but I could feel a new kind of confidence that hadn't been there during previous family conversations. "Look, I'm just trying to protect you from embarrassment. If you show up to some meeting expecting to advise a billionaire about investments, you might find yourself out of your depth very quickly." Victoria's tone had shifted from diplomatic to slightly condescending. like she was warning me about dangers I was too naive to recognize. I leaned back in my chair and studied my sister's face, trying to understand whether she was genuinely concerned about my professional reputation or whether this conversation was about something else entirely. What would you like me to do differently, Victoria? Should I tell Alexander I'm not interested in discussing business opportunities? I think you should just be realistic about what actually happened yesterday. You had an interesting conversation about a topic you enjoy, but that doesn't mean you're suddenly qualified to advise successful entrepreneurs about major financial decisions. Victoria's voice carried the patient tone she used when she thought someone was being deliberately obtuse. The irony wasn't lost on me that Victoria, who worked in marketing and had never managed investments beyond her company 401k, was explaining to me why I wasn't qualified to discuss financial strategies with someone who had specifically sought out my expertise. But arguing about qualifications would miss the larger point of what was really happening in this conversation. Victoria, are you concerned that my relationship with Alexander might affect your relationship with him? The question was direct, but it seemed like the underlying issue that we were dancing around with discussions of professional qualifications and realistic expectations. Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. That's ridiculous, Emma. Alexander and I have been together for 3 months. We're serious about each other. He's not going to be distracted by investment small talk with my little sister. But even as she said it, I could see uncertainty in her expression. The afternoon at the barbecue had clearly challenged her assumptions about her position with Alexander and her role within the family dynamic. For the first time, someone had shown more interest in continuing a conversation with me than in accommodating her preferences. I'm not trying to interfere with your relationship, I said carefully. But I'm also not going to pretend that my professional expertise isn't real, just to make you feel more comfortable about family hierarchy. The statement hung between us like a line drawn in sand. I was acknowledging that this conversation was fundamentally about family power dynamics, not about my qualifications or Alexander's professional intentions. Victoria had always been the successful sister, the one who brought impressive boyfriends to family events and commanded attention through her social connections. My emergence as someone with valuable expertise threatened that established order. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, stirring her untouched cappuccino while apparently considering her next approach. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its diplomatic patience and carried a sharper edge. Emma, I'm going to be direct with you. Alexander is important to me, and I don't appreciate you trying to insert yourself into our relationship by playing up some supposed business connection. I'm not inserting myself into anything, Victoria. Alexander specifically asked for my professional opinion, and I responded honestly. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's something you need to work out with him, not with me. My voice was steady, but I could feel my heart rate increasing as the conversation moved into more confrontational territory. You know what I think happened yesterday? I think you saw an opportunity to get attention and validation that you don't usually receive at family events, so you exaggerated your knowledge and success to impress someone who was just being polite. Victoria's tone had become accusatory, like she was presenting evidence of my deception. The attack was personal in a way that crossed beyond professional disagreement into character assassination. Victoria was suggesting that I had deliberately misrepresented myself to manipulate Alexander's attention, that my investment success was exaggerated, and that my expertise was performance rather than substance. Victoria, I have documentation of everything I discussed yesterday: bank statements, investment portfolios, client testimonials, performance records. My success isn't exaggerated, and my knowledge isn't superficial. If Alexander follows up on his meeting request, he'll discover that for himself. I kept my voice level, but I was angry at being accused of deception about achievements I'd worked years to build. Documentation can be manipulated, Emma. Anyone can create impressive-looking paperwork if they want to fool someone badly enough. The accusation was serious enough to constitute a real attack on my professional integrity, suggesting that I would forge financial records to create false impressions of success. I stared at Victoria across the small coffee shop table, trying to process the fact that my own sister was accusing me of financial fraud to explain why someone had shown professional interest in my work. The conversation had moved far beyond family rivalry into territory that felt genuinely destructive. I think this conversation is over, I said, standing up and reaching for my purse. If you want to discuss this further, you can do it after you've had time to think about what you're actually saying to me. Emma, wait. Victoria's voice had lost its accusatory edge and now carried a note of something that might have been panic. I didn't mean to suggest that you would actually forge documents. I'm just saying that maybe your success isn't as significant as Alexander thinks it is. But the damage was done. Victoria had revealed that she was willing to question my integrity and suggest criminal behavior to diminish my professional credibility. The conversation had shown me exactly how far she was prepared to go to protect her position as the family's successful daughter. Victoria, I don't know what's happening between you and Alexander that's making you feel threatened, but attacking my character isn't going to solve whatever problem you think you have. I remained standing, making it clear that I was done with this particular discussion. I'm not threatened by you, Emma. I'm just trying to prevent you from embarrassing yourself and our family by pretending to be something you're not. Victoria's voice carried a desperation that contradicted her words, revealing exactly how threatened she actually felt. I left the coffee shop without another word, walking to my car while replaying the entire conversation and trying to understand what had just happened. Victoria's reaction to Saturday's barbecue had been more extreme than I'd expected, moving quickly from diplomatic concern to personal attacks on my integrity. The intensity of her response suggested that she saw my professional recognition as a genuine threat to her relationship with Alexander and her position within the family. Driving toward Dad's office, I found myself thinking about family dynamics in a new way. For years, I'd accepted Victoria's role as the successful sister and my own role as the quiet, overlooked daughter who worked with numbers. But Saturday's barbecue had demonstrated that those roles were based on perception rather than reality, and perceptions could change quickly when new information became available. Rodriguez Plumbing Supply occupied a single-story building in an industrial area of Riverside, surrounded by similar businesses that served the construction and home improvement trades. I'd visited the office occasionally over the years, usually for brief family-related purposes, but I'd never been invited to participate in actual business discussions. Walking through the front entrance felt different now, like I was entering as a consultant rather than as Bob Rodriguez's daughter. Dad met me in the reception area wearing the kind of focused expression he used during important business meetings. He'd changed out of his barbecue clothes into the polo shirt and khakis that constituted his professional uniform, and he carried a thick folder of documents that suggested he'd spent time preparing for our consultation. Emma, thank you for making time for this. I've pulled together financial statements from the past 3 years, plus some projections and business plans I've been working on with my accountant. He gestured toward his office, a modest space with functional furniture and walls covered with industry certificates and family photos. As we settled into chairs around his desk, Dad opened the folder and spread documents across the surface with the systematic approach he brought to all business matters. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what I should be asking you to analyze. Yesterday's conversation was the first time I'd really considered using outside investment strategies to grow the business. I reviewed the financial statements quickly, noting patterns in revenue, expenses, and cash flow that told the story of a successful but traditionally managed business. Dad, these numbers look solid. You've built something really stable here. The question is whether you want to maintain steady growth or whether you're interested in more aggressive expansion strategies. I've been thinking about that since yesterday. I'm 58 years old, and I know I need to start planning for retirement within the next 10 years. But I also don't want to just coast until then. If there are opportunities to significantly grow the business value, I'd like to explore them. Dad's tone was serious, like someone making important long-term decisions rather than casual conversation. I spent the next hour walking through specific recommendations for both operational improvements and investment diversification. The business analysis revealed opportunities for inventory management efficiencies that could increase profit margins by 15%, plus digital marketing strategies that could expand their customer base beyond the local market. But the real potential lay in using the business's strong cash position to generate additional income through strategic investments. Your monthly cash flow could support a diversified investment portfolio that generates returns significantly higher than traditional savings accounts, I explained. showing Dad how cryptocurrency and blockchain investments could provide both growth and hedging against inflation. The key is treating investment income as a separate revenue stream that supplements rather than replaces the core business operations. Dad listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about risk management and implementation timelines. He approached the investment discussion with the same practical focus he brought to business decisions, wanting to understand both potential returns and worst-case scenarios before making commitments. Emma, I'm impressed by how thoroughly you've thought through these strategies. This isn't theoretical knowledge. You're talking about specific implementation steps and measurable outcomes. Dad's voice carried a note of surprise, like he was discovering capabilities he hadn't known I possessed. I've been developing these frameworks through my consulting work and my own investment management. Every strategy I'm recommending is something I've either implemented personally or helped other clients execute successfully. I felt confident discussing my track record because it was substantial and well documented. We were deep in discussion about blockchain infrastructure investments when Dad's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned slightly before answering. Rodriguez Plumbing Supply, this is Bob. His voice was professional, but I could see his expression change as he listened to whoever was calling. Victoria? Slow down, I can't understand what you're saying. Dad's voice took on the concerned tone he used during family emergencies, and I felt my stomach tighten as I realized my sister was calling Dad's business line during our consultation meeting. I could hear Victoria's voice through the phone, speaking rapidly and emotionally, though I couldn't make out specific words. Dad's expression grew increasingly serious as he listened, occasionally interjecting with questions like, "Are you sure about that?" and "Where did you hear this information?" After several minutes of listening, Dad's voice became firmer. "Victoria, I'm going to need you to calm down and explain this more clearly. Emma is here with me right now, working on some business analysis, and what you're saying doesn't match what I'm seeing." The mention of my presence seemed to escalate whatever Victoria was saying, because Dad's expression shifted from concern to something approaching frustration. "Victoria, that's enough. Emma is providing professional consultation services that I requested. If you have concerns about her qualifications, we can discuss them later, but right now I need to focus on business matters." After a few more minutes of increasingly tense conversation, Dad hung up the phone and looked at me with an expression that mixed apology with confusion. "Emma, I'm sorry about that interruption. Victoria seems to think there are some issues with your investment credentials that I should be aware of before we proceed with any business arrangements." My heart sank as I realized that Victoria had decided to escalate her concerns beyond our coffee shop conversation to direct interference with my professional opportunities. She was now actively trying to undermine my consulting relationship with Dad by questioning my qualifications and integrity. "What specifically did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite feeling angry and betrayed by my sister's actions. "She suggested that you might have exaggerated your investment success, and that I should be careful about taking financial advice from someone without proper credentials or regulatory oversight." Dad's tone was neutral, but I could see him evaluating how to handle a situation where his daughters were in conflict about business matters. I felt a flash of anger at Victoria's willingness to sabotage my professional relationship with our father, but I forced myself to respond calmly and factually. "Dad, every statement I've made about my investment performance can be verified through official documentation. I can provide you with account statements, performance records, and client references that confirm everything I've discussed." "I believe you, Emma. The analysis you've presented today is detailed and well-reasoned, and it's clear that you understand these markets much better than Victoria suggested." Dad's voice carried conviction, but I could see that he was troubled by the family conflict that was interfering with business decisions. "Would you like me to compile that documentation for you? I understand that family relationships make this situation complicated, but my professional work should stand on its own merits." I wanted to give Dad the option of verifying my credentials without making it seem like I was defensive about Victoria's accusations. "That would be helpful, but not because I doubt you. I think it would be useful to have formal documentation of your qualifications in case this becomes an ongoing consulting relationship." Dad's response suggested that he was treating Victoria's interference as a family matter separate from the business analysis we were conducting. We spent another 30 minutes completing our review of investment strategies and implementation plans, but the interruption had changed the dynamic of our meeting. I found myself being more formal and detailed in my explanations, unconsciously compensating for Victoria's attempt to undermine my credibility. Dad seemed to recognize this shift and made a point of asking follow-up questions that demonstrated his confidence in my expertise. As we concluded the meeting, Dad walked me to the front entrance of the building, his expression thoughtful. "Emma, I want you to know that your sister's concerns don't affect my assessment of your professional capabilities. What you've presented today is exactly the kind of strategic thinking I've been looking for." "Thank you, Dad. I appreciate that, and I understand that this situation is complicated by family dynamics." I wanted to acknowledge the difficulty of his position without making him feel like he had to choose sides between his daughters. "Family dynamics shouldn't interfere with good business decisions," Dad replied firmly. "I'm going to move forward with implementing some of these recommendations, and I'd like to establish a formal consulting arrangement with you if you're interested." The offer represented everything I'd hoped for from our meeting, but it also meant that my professional relationship with Dad would continue, despite Victoria's attempts to interfere. I felt gratitude mixed with apprehension about how this might affect family relationships going forward. "I'm definitely interested in a formal consulting arrangement. I'll send you a proposal with documentation of my credentials and a suggested scope of work." As I spoke, I realized that I was committing to a professional path that would make me a permanent part of Dad's business planning, fundamentally changing my role within the family structure. Driving home from Dad's office, I reflected on how much had changed in just 3 days since the barbecue. I'd gone from being the overlooked daughter to having both a billionaire entrepreneur and my own father seeking my professional advice. But those opportunities had come with the cost of an increasingly hostile relationship with Victoria, who was willing to interfere with my career to protect her own position within the family hierarchy. The situation felt unstable, in a way that suggested more conflict was inevitable. Victoria had escalated from diplomatic concern to personal attacks to direct professional interference within the span of a single day. If she continued to feel threatened by my emerging role as a recognized expert, there was no telling how far she might go to undermine my credibility and success. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had allies and resources that could withstand whatever challenges Victoria might create. Alexander's professional interest and Dad's business consultation represented external validation that couldn't be dismissed as family favoritism or misunderstanding. My expertise was being recognized and valued by people whose judgment carried weight beyond family dynamics. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table organizing the documentation I would send to both Dad and Alexander, building a comprehensive portfolio that demonstrated my qualifications and track record. As I worked, I felt a growing sense of confidence that whatever conflicts lay ahead, I was finally positioned to defend my professional reputation and continue building the career I'd worked years to establish. The quiet daughter who had been overlooked at family gatherings was becoming someone whose expertise was actively sought by successful business leaders. Victoria might not accept that transformation easily, but it was happening regardless of her preferences, supported by evidence and achievements that couldn't be argued away or undermined through family politics. 3 weeks after Dad's office meeting, the formal consulting arrangement had transformed into something neither of us had anticipated. What started as investment advice had evolved into a comprehensive business modernization project that was generating measurable results within days of implementation. The blockchain-based inventory system I'd recommended had already reduced overhead costs by 12%, while the cryptocurrency investment portfolio was showing returns that exceeded even my optimistic projections. But the professional success had come with personal costs that were becoming harder to ignore. Victoria's interference had escalated from phone calls to Dad's office to a coordinated campaign designed to undermine my credibility with anyone who might validate my expertise. She'd reached out to my colleagues at the investment firm, asking probing questions about my qualifications under the guise of planning a surprise family celebration of my success. She'd contacted Sophia and other family members with concerns about my, quote, sudden personality change, and suggestions that my new confidence might be covering up personal or financial problems. The most troubling development was her attempt to research Alexander's background and business connections, apparently hoping to find information that would explain his interest in my work as something other than professional respect. She'd created fake social media profiles to follow his company's employees, and she'd even attended a tech industry networking event where she knew he'd be speaking, positioning herself to accidentally encounter him without me present. I learned about these activities gradually, through concerned messages from Sophia and awkward conversations with colleagues who weren't sure how to handle Victoria's inquiries. The pattern was systematic and increasingly desperate, like someone trying to construct an alternative explanation for events that threatened her understanding of family hierarchy and personal worth. The situation reached a breaking point on a Thursday evening when Alexander and I were concluding our third formal business meeting at a downtown Riverside restaurant. We'd been discussing his company's expansion into emerging markets and my analysis of cryptocurrency adoption trends in developing economies. The conversation had been purely professional, focused on market data and investment strategies, but it had also been intellectually stimulating in a way that made me realize how much I'd missed having colleagues who understood the technical aspects of my work. Emma, I have to say, your insights into regulatory arbitrage in the DeFi space are some of the most sophisticated I've encountered outside of institutional research teams, Alexander said as we reviewed the market analysis I'd prepared. Have you considered transitioning into independent consulting full-time? There's definitely demand for this level of expertise. The suggestion wasn't entirely new. I'd been thinking about expanding my consulting practice as demand for my services grew beyond what I could handle while maintaining my regular job. But hearing it from someone of Alexander's stature felt like validation that such a transition could be financially viable and professionally rewarding. I've been considering it, especially since Dad's project has been so successful. But independent consulting requires a substantial client base before you can justify leaving stable employment. I was being conservative in my response, but the truth was that I'd already begun developing a business plan for launching my own investment advisory firm. I'd be willing to serve as a founding client if you decide to make that transition. My company could use ongoing consultation on cryptocurrency integration and blockchain infrastructure development. Alexander's offer was specific enough to constitute a genuine business proposal rather than polite encouragement. We were discussing potential timelines and service agreements when Victoria appeared at our table with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested she'd been waiting for the right moment to make an entrance. She looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that was far too formal for the casual restaurant we'd chosen, her hair and makeup professionally styled like she was attending a significant social event. Alexander, darling, I thought I might find you here. Emma mentioned you two were having a business meeting, and I wanted to surprise you. Victoria's voice was bright and affectionate, but her eyes were taking in every detail of our professional discussion with sharp attention. The interruption was clearly intentional, designed to insert herself into a conversation she hadn't been invited to join, and to remind both Alexander and me that she had a claim on his time and attention that superseded business meetings. But Alexander's response suggested that he didn't appreciate the surprise as much as Victoria had anticipated. Victoria, hello. Emma and I are actually in the middle of some detailed financial planning discussions. Perhaps we could arrange to meet up afterward? His tone was polite but firm, indicating that he considered this a professional meeting that shouldn't be interrupted by personal visits. Victoria's smile remained bright, but I caught a flash of something in her expression that looked like panic at being dismissed. Oh, I don't mind waiting. I find Emma's work fascinating, even though I don't understand all the technical details. Maybe I could learn something. She pulled out the empty chair at our table and sat down without waiting for an invitation, positioning herself between Alexander and me in a way that made continuing our previous conversation practically impossible. The move was bold enough to be socially awkward, but Victoria seemed determined to prevent us from completing our business discussion privately. Alexander looked genuinely uncomfortable with the situation, but his response was diplomatically neutral. Of course you're welcome to join us, though I should mention that we're discussing some fairly complex financial instruments that might not be particularly entertaining for someone not directly involved in the investment process. The comment was meant to give Victoria a graceful exit from a conversation that wasn't intended for her, but instead of taking the hint, she doubled down on her involvement. Actually, I've been doing some research into Emma's investment strategies lately, and I have some questions that might be relevant to your discussion." My stomach tightened as I realized that Victoria was planning to use this opportunity to challenge my expertise in front of Alexander, probably hoping to reveal gaps in my knowledge or inconsistencies in my track record. The research she mentioned was likely the result of her weeks-long campaign to find ways to undermine my professional credibility. "What kind of questions?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite feeling like I was walking into a trap she'd been carefully setting. Victoria opened her purse and pulled out a small notebook, suggesting that she'd come prepared for this confrontation. "Well, for instance, I've been trying to understand how someone with your background and resources could have achieved the investment returns you've been claiming. The mathematics seem rather extraordinary." The attack was disguised as curiosity, but the implication was clear. Victoria was publicly questioning whether my reported investment success was mathematically plausible, given my starting capital and time frame. She was essentially accusing me of lying about my financial achievements in front of the person whose professional respect meant the most to me. Alexander's expression shifted from diplomatic patience to something approaching offense on my behalf. "Victoria, I've reviewed Emma's portfolio performance personally, and her returns are well within the range of successful cryptocurrency early adopters. The mathematics are actually quite straightforward when you understand the compound growth potential of emerging asset classes." But Victoria wasn't deterred by Alexander's defense of my credibility. "I'm sure Emma's investments have been successful to some degree," she continued, her tone suggesting magnanimous acknowledgement of modest achievements. "But some of the specific numbers she's mentioned seem inconsistent with publicly available data about cryptocurrency performance during the periods she's claiming." The accusation was more serious than general skepticism about my success. Victoria was suggesting that she'd conducted research that contradicted my specific claims about investment timing and returns, implying that I'd fabricated details to impress Alexander and the family. "Victoria, I can provide you with time-stamped transaction records, tax documents, and third-party account statements that verify every claim I've made about my investment performance," I replied calmly, though internally I was furious that she was attempting to destroy my professional reputation in such a public and calculated way. "Documents can be modified or misinterpreted, Emma. I'm just saying that independent verification might be helpful before anyone makes major business decisions based on your advice." Victoria's voice remained sweet, but her words were designed to plant seeds of doubt about my integrity and competence. Alexander's response was immediate and decisive. "Victoria, I think you're overstepping here. Emma's qualifications and track record have been thoroughly verified through multiple independent sources. What you're suggesting borders on accusation of fraud, which is both inappropriate and inaccurate." The defense was stronger than I'd expected, and it clearly caught Victoria off guard. She'd anticipated that Alexander might be diplomatically neutral in a conflict between his girlfriend and her sister, but instead he was actively defending my professional integrity against her attacks. "I'm not accusing anyone of fraud," Victoria backtracked quickly, realizing that her strategy was backfiring. "I'm just concerned that family members might be taking financial risks based on advice that hasn't been properly vetted by qualified professionals." "Emma is a qualified professional," Alexander replied firmly. "Her analysis demonstrates sophisticated understanding of complex financial markets, and her recommendations have proven profitable for multiple clients. I'm not sure what research you think contradicts her track record, but I'd be very surprised if it were accurate." The exchange had attracted attention from other diners, who were clearly uncomfortable witnessing what appeared to be a family argument escalating in a public restaurant. Victoria seemed to realize that her confrontation was creating a scene that reflected poorly on all of us, but she appeared committed to continuing her attack despite the social awkwardness. "Alexander, I appreciate that you want to be supportive of Emma's interests, but as her sister, I have a responsibility to make sure she doesn't get in over her head with business situations she might not be prepared to handle." Victoria's tone had shifted to protective concern, reframing her attack as familial care. "Victoria, Emma has demonstrated expertise that exceeds most financial professionals I work with regularly. She's not in over her head, she's providing valuable services that generate measurable results." Alexander's voice had become cold in a way that suggested his patience with Victoria's interference was completely exhausted. I watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude for Alexander's support and growing disbelief at Victoria's willingness to destroy our family relationships to undermine my professional success. She was essentially forcing Alexander to choose between supporting her concerns or defending my competence, apparently confident that their romantic relationship would influence his position. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Victoria suggested, looking directly at Alexander with an expression that reminded him of their personal connection and implied that Emma was the outsider in this situation. "I think this conversation has gone far enough," Alexander replied. "Emma and I have business matters to conclude, and I'd prefer to do that without further interruption." The dismissal was polite but absolute, indicating that Alexander had no intention of continuing Victoria's campaign against my credibility. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions that revealed her shock at being so definitively rejected in favor of her sister's professional standing. "Fine," Victoria said, standing up abruptly and smoothing her dress with sharp, angry movements. "But don't say I didn't warn you when this whole situation becomes more complicated than either of you anticipated." The threat was vague but ominous, suggesting that Victoria had additional strategies for undermining my success that she hadn't yet deployed. As she walked away from our table, I felt a combination of relief that the immediate confrontation was over and apprehension about what she might do next. Alexander was quiet for several minutes after Victoria left, apparently processing what had just happened and its implications for both his business relationship with me and his personal relationship with my sister. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that suggested he was reconsidering more than just the evening's events. "Emma, I owe you an apology for that situation. Victoria's behavior tonight was inappropriate, and I should have intervened sooner to prevent it from escalating." His tone was professional but also personal, acknowledging that the conflict had affected both our business discussion and our family relationships. "You don't need to apologize for Victoria's choices," I replied carefully. "But I am concerned about how this might affect your relationship with her. She clearly feels threatened by our business collaboration." Alexander was quiet for another moment, staring at the financial documents we'd been reviewing before Victoria's arrival. "Emma, I need to be honest with you about something. My relationship with Victoria has been complicated for several weeks now, partly because of what happened at your family barbecue." The admission caught me off guard, though it explained some of Victoria's increasingly desperate behavior over the past month. "What do you mean by complicated?" "Victoria and I have very different values and priorities, and those differences became much more apparent after I met your family. She's focused on image and social status in ways that I find exhausting. You're focused on substance and achievement in ways that I find inspiring." Alexander's words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was clear. "Alexander, I don't want to be responsible for problems in your relationship with Victoria. That wasn't my intention when we started working together. I felt obligated to offer him an exit from our business collaboration if it was creating personal difficulties. Emma, my relationship problems with Victoria aren't your fault, and they're not related to our professional work together. They're the result of fundamental incompatibilities that would have become apparent eventually, regardless of our business discussions." Alexander's tone was definitive, indicating that he'd been thinking about these issues independently of tonight's confrontation. We spent the next hour completing our business planning discussion, but the dynamic had changed in ways that felt both promising and concerning. Alexander was clearly committed to our professional relationship, but his comments about Victoria suggested that their romantic relationship was deteriorating in ways that would inevitably affect family dynamics. 2 days later, the situation reached its climax when Victoria showed up at my apartment unannounced, her usual polished appearance replaced by something that looked like genuine distress. Her hair was pulled back hastily, she wore minimal makeup, and her clothes suggested she'd dressed quickly without attention to her usual image standards. "Emma, we need to talk," she said when I opened the door, her voice carrying an urgency that was very different from her previous confrontational approaches. I let her in, noting that she seemed agitated in a way that went beyond anger or frustration into something approaching panic. She paced around my small living room like someone trying to work up the courage to deliver bad news or make a difficult confession. "Victoria, what's wrong? You look upset." Despite our recent conflict, she was still my sister, and her obvious distress triggered familial concern that overrode professional disagreements. Alexander broke up with me, she said without preamble, her voice flat in the way that sometimes follows emotional exhaustion. He said we want different things and that our values are incompatible. He said the relationship has run its course. The news wasn't entirely surprising given Alexander's comments about their relationship problems, but I was still taken aback by the finality of the breakup and its implications for family dynamics going forward. Victoria, I'm sorry. I know you cared about him. I meant it. Despite our professional conflicts, I didn't want Victoria to experience heartbreak, especially if my business relationship with Alexander had contributed to their romantic problems. He said I was interfering with his business relationships, and that he couldn't continue dating someone who tried to undermine his professional colleagues. Victoria's voice was bitter, as she repeated what were clearly Alexander's specific words during their breakup conversation. The explanation confirmed that Victoria's campaign against my credibility had backfired completely, costing her the relationship she'd been trying to protect, while strengthening the business collaboration she'd been trying to destroy. Victoria, I'm genuinely sorry that happened. I never wanted my work with Alexander to affect your relationship with him. I sat down across from her, wanting to offer comfort despite our recent tensions. That's the worst part, Emma. You didn't try to interfere with our relationship. I did that myself by attacking you. Victoria's voice carried a note of self-awareness that I'd rarely heard from her before. I was so threatened by your success that I sabotaged my own happiness trying to protect something that didn't need protection. The admission was more honest than anything Victoria had said to me in years, revealing genuine insight into her own behavior and its consequences. For the first time since the barbecue, she seemed to be speaking to me as a sister, rather than as a threat to be neutralized. Why were you so threatened by my success? We've always supported each other's achievements. I asked the question gently, wanting to understand the psychological dynamics that had driven Victoria's behavior without making her feel attacked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands, while apparently trying to find words for feelings she'd probably never articulated before. Because I've spent my entire adult life being the successful sister, the one with the impressive boyfriend and the glamorous life, when everyone started treating you as the expert, the one with real achievements, I felt like I was disappearing. The explanation revealed insecurities that went much deeper than professional rivalry or romantic jealousy. Victoria had built her identity around being the family success story, and my emergence, as someone with substantive achievements, had threatened her entire sense of self-worth. Victoria, you don't have to be the only successful person in the family for your achievements to matter. There's room for both of us to be good at different things. I wanted to reassure her that my success didn't diminish her own accomplishments or value. I know that intellectually, but it didn't feel that way when Alexander spent an entire afternoon asking for your advice instead of paying attention to me. I felt like I was being replaced by someone better. Victoria's voice was small in a way that reminded me of childhood insecurities rather than adult professional competition. We talked for another 2 hours, working through years of family dynamics and sibling rivalry that had been lurking beneath the surface of our relationship. Victoria apologized for her attempts to undermine my credibility, acknowledging that her behavior had been motivated by fear rather than legitimate concerns about my qualifications. I apologized for not being more sensitive to how my emerging success might affect her sense of position within the family. The conversation didn't solve all our relationship problems immediately, but it established a foundation for rebuilding trust and mutual support that had been damaged by recent conflicts. Victoria agreed to stop interfering with my professional relationships, and I agreed to be more mindful of including her in family discussions about business and financial planning. 6 months later, the consulting firm I'd launched was thriving beyond my most optimistic projections. Alexander had become a founding client as promised, but my business had grown to include multiple corporate clients and individual investors who valued my expertise in cryptocurrency and emerging markets. Dad's business modernization project had been so successful that he'd recommended my services to other business owners in his network, creating a steady stream of referrals. Victoria had started her own business too, leveraging her social media expertise and marketing background to launch a successful digital marketing consultancy focused on lifestyle brands. We'd found ways to collaborate professionally, with Victoria handling marketing and social media strategy for my consulting firm, while I provided financial planning services for her business clients who needed investment advice. The family dynamics had stabilized into something healthier than our previous hierarchy, with both Victoria and me recognized for our respective expertise and achievements. Dad had officially brought me on as a partner in Rodriguez Plumbing Supply, while Victoria had been hired to modernize the company's marketing and customer outreach strategies. Alexander and I had continued our professional relationship, which had gradually evolved into a personal friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests in technology and finance. Victoria had initially been uncomfortable with our ongoing collaboration, but she'd eventually recognized that our connection was genuinely professional rather than romantic, and that her previous fears had been unfounded. The annual summer barbecue that year felt completely different from the previous year's gathering. Instead of being the overlooked daughter hoping for acknowledgement, I was the family business partner whose advice was actively sought by multiple relatives planning their financial futures. Instead of being the center of attention through social connections, Victoria was respected for her own professional achievements and business expertise. Dad's announcement that year was about expansion plans for Rodriguez Plumbing Supply, including new service territories and technological innovations that would position the company for growth over the next decade. Both Victoria and I had contributed to the strategic planning, with our different skills complementing each other rather than competing for recognition. As I looked around the backyard at family members discussing investment strategies and business opportunities with genuine enthusiasm, I reflected on how much had changed since that afternoon when Alexander first asked for my investment advice. The question that had seemed like polite small talk had triggered a complete transformation of family dynamics, professional relationships, and personal confidence that none of us could have anticipated. The quiet daughter who had accepted being overlooked had become someone whose expertise was valued by successful entrepreneurs and family members alike. The golden child who had defined herself through others' achievements had discovered her own substantive capabilities and built something meaningful independently. Most importantly, we'd both learned that success wasn't a zero-sum competition where one person's achievements diminished another's worth. The barbecue ended that year with both Victoria and me helping Dad plan business strategies for the coming year, working together as partners rather than rivals, each contributing different but equally valuable perspectives to family decisions that would affect all of us going forward. The morning after Victoria's confrontation at the restaurant, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a series of increasingly frantic text messages from various family members. The first was from Sophia at 6 a.m. asking if I was okay, followed by messages from Tia Carmen, Uncle Miguel, and even some cousins I rarely spoke to, all expressing concern about what happened with Victoria and Alexander last night. Apparently, word of the public scene had spread through the family network with the speed that only Rodriguez family drama could achieve. But the most surprising message was from Alexander himself, sent at what must have been around midnight. Emma, I apologize again for tonight's situation. Would it be possible to meet for coffee this morning? There are some things I'd like to discuss privately, both about our business collaboration and about the broader situation with your family. I spent longer than usual getting ready that morning, unsure whether this meeting would be professional damage control, personal relationship management, or something else entirely. The restaurant incident had crossed boundaries between business and family in ways that felt potentially destructive to everything I'd been building over the past month. We met at a quiet cafe in downtown Riverside, far from the trendy spots Victoria preferred and the family-friendly places where we might encounter relatives. Alexander was already seated when I arrived, looking uncharacteristically serious as he stared into a cup of black coffee. He was dressed more casually than usual, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but his expression carried the weight of someone who had spent the night making difficult decisions. "Thank you for meeting me on short notice," he said as I sat down across from him. "I know last night was uncomfortable for everyone involved, and I wanted to address it directly rather than letting the situation fester." I ordered a latte and studied his face, trying to gauge whether this conversation would end with the dissolution of our business relationship or something else entirely. "Alexander, I'm the one who should be apologizing. My family drama shouldn't have interfered with our professional discussions. Emma, what happened last night wasn't family drama. It was systematic interference with business relationships, and it revealed some things about Victoria that I've been trying to ignore for weeks." His voice was measured, but I could hear an undercurrent of frustration that suggested this wasn't just about the restaurant incident. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of screenshots that made my stomach drop. Victoria had been messaging his business associates, his company's board members, and even some of his investors, asking questions about me under the pretense of planning some kind of family celebration of my success. The messages were carefully worded to plant doubt about my qualifications while appearing to seek positive information. She contacted my CFO 3 days ago, asking about your background and whether I was making sound business decisions in working with you. She reached out to 2 of my investors with concerns about whether I was being manipulated by someone without proper credentials. Alexander's tone was clinical as he described Victoria's campaign, but I could see anger in his expression. Alexander, I had no idea she was doing this. I knew she was upset about our business relationship, but I didn't realize she was actively trying to damage my professional reputation with your network. I felt sick thinking about how Victoria's interference could have destroyed opportunities I didn't even know existed. The worst part is that her questions were sophisticated enough to suggest she'd done real research into your background and our business discussions. She knew details about our projects that she could only have learned through careful investigation of your work. Alexander's voice carried a note of betrayal that suggested he felt personally violated by Victoria's actions. I sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what Victoria had done and its potential implications for both my career and Alexander's business relationships. What did your associates say when she contacted them? Most of them found her inquiries strange and inappropriate, which is how I learned about them. My CFO said she was asking questions that sounded like industrial espionage disguised as family concern. One of my investors said her approach reminded him of tactics used by competitors trying to gather intelligence about business partnerships. Alexander's response revealed just how damaging Victoria's campaign could have been if his associates had taken her concerns seriously. I understand if you need to reconsider our business relationship, I said quietly. I can't guarantee that Victoria won't continue this kind of behavior, and I don't want my family situation to create problems for your business. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing his response carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried a decisiveness that suggested he'd already made up his mind about something important. Emma, I'm not reconsidering our business relationship. Your expertise and professionalism speak for themselves, and I'm not going to allow someone else's interference to affect my judgment about valuable partnerships. He paused, then continued with what looked like some difficulty. But I am ending my relationship with Victoria. The announcement wasn't entirely surprising given the previous night's events, but hearing it stated so definitively still felt momentous. Alexander was choosing our professional collaboration over his romantic relationship with my sister, a decision that would inevitably have major consequences for family dynamics. Alexander, I don't want to be responsible for your relationship problems with Victoria. That's not what I intended when we started working together. I felt compelled to offer him an alternative that wouldn't force him to choose between business partnerships and personal relationships. Emma, my problems with Victoria aren't your fault, and they're not really about our business relationship. They're about fundamental differences in values and character that became impossible to ignore after I saw how she was willing to treat you. Alexander's tone was firm, indicating that he'd been thinking about these issues independently of the previous night's confrontation. He explained that Victoria's campaign against my credibility had revealed patterns of behavior that extended beyond sibling rivalry into territory that made him uncomfortable about her character and judgment. Her willingness to potentially damage my career to protect her own position suggested a ruthlessness that didn't align with his own values or his expectations for personal relationships. I've been questioning our compatibility for weeks, but last night made it clear that we want different things from life and relationships. Victoria is focused on maintaining appearances and social status. You're focused on building something meaningful and substantial. Those are fundamentally different approaches to success and fulfillment. His analysis was thoughtful and considered, not the result of a single argument but of careful evaluation over time. We spent the next hour discussing how to handle the business and personal complications that would inevitably result from Alexander's decision. He assured me that our professional relationship would continue regardless of family dynamics, and he offered to provide documentation that would protect my reputation if Victoria escalated her interference campaign. But he also wanted to discuss something that surprised me completely. Emma, I'd like to ask you to consider expanding our business relationship beyond consulting into something more substantial. I've been looking for a partner to help develop the cryptocurrency and blockchain infrastructure for my company's expansion into emerging markets. Based on our work together, I think you'd be perfect for that role. The offer was significant enough to constitute a major career opportunity, the kind of position that could establish me as a leader in the cryptocurrency consulting field, rather than just a successful individual practitioner. But it would also mean leaving my current job and taking on responsibilities that would make me a public figure in the business community. What kind of timeline are you thinking about for something like that? I asked, trying to process the implications of such a major professional transition. I'd want to move fairly quickly, within the next few months if possible. The cryptocurrency market is evolving rapidly, and early positioning in the consulting space could establish significant competitive advantages. Alexander's response suggested that this wasn't a casual offer, but part of a serious business strategy. We discussed details of what such a partnership might look like, from equity arrangements to operational responsibilities to public representation of the company's cryptocurrency initiatives. The conversation was exciting and intimidating in equal measure, representing opportunities I'd dreamed about but hadn't expected to encounter so early in my career. As our meeting concluded, Alexander handed me a business card with contact information for his attorney and financial advisor. Emma, I want you to have these reviewed by independent counsel before making any decisions. This needs to be a business decision based on your own interests and goals, not influenced by family complications or personal relationships. Walking back to my car, I felt overwhelmed by the rapid pace of change in my professional and personal life. In less than a month, I'd gone from being the overlooked family member to having a billionaire entrepreneur offer me a business partnership that could transform my career. But those opportunities had come with the cost of family conflict that was threatening to destroy my relationship with Victoria. That afternoon, I called Dad to update him on the morning's conversation and to warn him that family dynamics were about to become much more complicated. His response was characteristically practical and supportive. Emma, you can't control Victoria's choices, but you can control your own. If Alexander is offering you legitimate business opportunities based on your expertise, you should evaluate them on their own merits without worrying about family politics. Dad's advice was straightforward, but I could hear concern in his voice about how these developments might affect overall family relationships. I'm worried that accepting Alexander's partnership offer might permanently damage my relationship with Victoria, I admitted. She's already convinced that I'm trying to interfere with her romantic relationship. If I become his business partner, she'll probably see it as ultimate betrayal. Victoria's relationship with Alexander is between them, and your career decisions should be based on what's best for your professional future. If Victoria can't separate business from personal relationships, that's her problem to solve, not yours. Dad's response was supportive, but I could tell he was also concerned about the potential for long-term family division. 2 days later, Victoria showed up at my apartment without warning, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usual polished appearance was completely absent, replaced by casual clothes and minimal makeup that revealed how the recent stress was affecting her. Emma, Alexander broke up with me, she said without preamble, her voice flat in a way that suggested emotional exhaustion. He said I was interfering with his business relationships, and that he couldn't continue dating someone who tried to undermine his professional colleagues. Despite our recent conflicts, seeing Victoria so obviously devastated triggered my protective instincts as her sister. Victoria, I'm sorry. I know you cared about him. The worst part is that he was right, she continued, collapsing onto my couch with the kind of defeated posture that suggested complete emotional surrender. I did try to undermine you, and I did it because I was jealous and threatened by your success. I sabotaged my own relationship because I couldn't handle the fact that you were better at something than I was. The admission was more honest than anything Victoria had said to me in years, revealing genuine self-awareness about her behavior and its consequences. For the first time since the barbecue, she seemed to be speaking to me as a sister, rather than as a threat to be neutralized. Why were you so threatened by my success? We've always supported each other's achievements before. I asked the question gently, wanting to understand the psychological dynamics that had driven Victoria's behavior without making her feel attacked. Victoria spent the next hour explaining how my emergence as a recognized expert had triggered insecurities that went much deeper than professional rivalry. She'd built her identity around being the successful sister, the one with impressive connections and enviable relationships. When everyone started treating me as the expert with valuable knowledge, she felt like her entire sense of self-worth was being undermined. "I've spent my whole adult life being the Rodriguez daughter who made the family proud," she said through tears. "When Alexander started asking for your advice instead of paying attention to me, I felt like I was being replaced by someone better, smarter, more accomplished." The conversation revealed years of sibling dynamics that neither of us had fully understood or addressed. Victoria had always assumed that family recognition was a zero-sum competition, where one person's success necessarily diminished another's value. My achievements hadn't just threatened her romantic relationship, they'd challenged her entire understanding of her place within the family hierarchy. We talked for hours, working through childhood memories and adult insecurities that had shaped our relationship in ways we'd never consciously recognized. Victoria apologized sincerely for her attempts to damage my professional reputation, acknowledging that her behavior had been motivated by fear rather than legitimate concerns about my qualifications. "Emma, I want to support your success, but I don't know how to do that when it feels like you're taking over everything I thought I was good at," Victoria said, with the kind of vulnerability that reminded me why I'd always loved my sister despite our differences. "Victoria, there's room for both of us to be successful in different ways. Your social skills and marketing expertise are just as valuable as my financial knowledge. We don't have to compete. We could collaborate." As I spoke, I realized that I meant it completely. Victoria's interference had been destructive, but her underlying capabilities were substantial and complementary to my own strengths. Over the following weeks, Victoria and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and clear boundaries. She stopped interfering with my professional relationships and began focusing on developing her own business opportunities. I made an effort to include her in family discussions about financial planning and business strategy, recognizing her expertise in areas where I had limited knowledge. 3 months later, I accepted Alexander's partnership offer and launched my own cryptocurrency consulting firm with him as the founding client. Victoria started her own digital marketing consultancy, specializing in lifestyle brands and social media strategy. We found ways to collaborate professionally, with Victoria handling marketing and public relations for my consulting business, while I provided financial planning services for her clients who needed investment advice. The family dynamics stabilized into something healthier than our previous hierarchy. Dad brought me on as a financial advisor for Rodriguez Plumbing Supply, while hiring Victoria to modernize the company's customer outreach and online presence. Both of our expertise were valued and utilized, but in ways that complemented rather than competed with each other. Alexander and I maintained our professional partnership, which gradually evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests in technology and finance. Victoria eventually started dating someone new, a marketing executive who appreciated her social intelligence and business acumen without feeling threatened by her family connections. The following year's barbecue felt completely different from the gathering that had started this entire transformation. Instead of being the overlooked daughter hoping for acknowledgement, I was the family business partner whose advice was actively sought by relatives planning their financial futures. Instead of defining herself through romantic relationships, Victoria was respected for her own professional achievements and business expertise. Dad's announcement that year focused on expansion plans for Rodriguez Plumbing Supply, including new service territories and technological innovations that would position the company for growth over the next decade. Both Victoria and I had contributed to the strategic planning, with our different skills creating a comprehensive business development approach that neither of us could have achieved independently. As I looked around the backyard at family members discussing investment strategies and business opportunities with genuine enthusiasm, I reflected on how completely everything had changed since that afternoon when Alexander first asked for my investment advice. What had seemed like polite small talk had triggered a complete transformation of family relationships, professional opportunities, and personal confidence that none of us could have anticipated. The quiet daughter who had accepted being overlooked had become someone whose expertise was valued by successful entrepreneurs and family members alike. The sister who had felt threatened by change had discovered her own substantive capabilities and built something meaningful through her own efforts. Most importantly, we'd both learned that success wasn't about taking opportunities away from others, but about creating value that benefited everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.